She endured his cruelty for months, remaining mute. However, her father, the town's new police superintendent, ensured that justice was served when he crossed the line. The lunchroom at Westridge Middle School was a battlefield, but it was not the type where fists were thrown or food battles ensued. It was considerably less noisy than that. It was the type of location in which a single glance could convey the entirety of one's identity: who belonged, who did not, who was significant, who was not. Eva Sinclair, a 13-year-old, sat at the far end of the cafeteria, feigning not to hear the whispers 2 tables away as she picked at the edges of her peanut butter sandwich. Someone murmured, "Why does she always sit alone? Maybe she doesn't have any friends." All of it had been previously disclosed to Eva. She was not unfamiliar with the sensation of being an interloper. She was one of the few black pupils at Westridge, and she had learned early on that it was not an option to blend in. Instead, she endeavored to remain undetectable, traveling through the hallways like a shadow, and maintaining her privacy. It was more convenient that way. However, this is not the case for Connor Tate. Connor had dedicated himself to ensuring that Eva was fully informed of her situation. He was not merely another student at school. He was a boy who walked with the confidence of a man who owned the place. He was the son of a local businessman, and had connections in all the right places. Connor was the name that instructors used with a smile, the child that parents invited over for pool parties, and the one who could talk his way out of any situation. And for the previous month, he had determined that Eva was his favorite target. It began innocuously, by accidentally running into her in the hallway and shoving her books off her desk. The type of behavior that would not be classified as bullying, merely children being children. However, it did not conclude there. Today she consumed her supper. Eva had scarcely begun to consume her meal when a hand abruptly removed her paper bag from the table. She raised her head, and there he was, beaming as if the entire situation were a joke. "What you got, Sinclair?" Connor's revulsion was exacerbated as she tore the bag open and extracted her sandwich. "Peanut butter? Seriously? Guess your dad's new job doesn't pay enough for real food." The table behind him was reverberating with laughter. Eva's jaw tightened as her fingertips curled beneath the table, but she maintained her silence. She consistently executed this action. Connor approached with a more intimate posture. "You know, you should really say thank you. I'm just trying to help you diet." He threw the sandwich over his shoulder, and it landed on the floor with a gentle thunk. Eva's midsection contorted. She was not going to cry, not in their presence, not here. She reached down to retrieve the remainder of her lunch. However, a foot landed on the sandwich, causing it to collide with the tile. Connor's lips curled upward. Oops. The world appeared to contract for a brief period. Eva was alone with the crushed sandwich, and the reverberating sound of their mirth in her ears. She could sense their gaze upon her, anticipating her actions. However, she was already aware. She arose, ignoring the whispers, snickers, and the heat that burned behind her eyes, and seized her backpack, pushing past the tables. She continued to walk, continue past the cafeteria doors, past the lockers, and all the way to the ladies' bathroom. She secured the cubicle, seated herself on the closed toilet lid, and exhaled slowly. None of this was novel. She would wait until the lunch bell rang, then slip out and feign that none of the aforementioned had occurred. Because it has never been effective to inform someone. The principal would refer to it as a misunderstanding, and the instructors would advise the student to disregard him. The cycle would recommence the following day. However, Eva was unaware that tomorrow would be distinct. She would respond tomorrow. Connor would drive her to new heights tomorrow, surpassing his previous limits. However, at this time, she was only able to wait. When Eva arrived home that afternoon, she spoke scarcely. She proceeded directly to her bedroom, gently closing the door behind her. She was not the sort to slam objects. She possessed the ability to vanish, even within her own residence. But her father observed Eva. The door was penetrated by his profound voice. "Everything all right?" Before she placed her backpack onto the bed, she hesitated, her fingers clenching around the strap. "Yeah. Just tired." A moment of silence ensued, followed by a gentle exhalation. "All right. Dinner's in an hour." She delayed her exhalation until the sound of his footfall diminished. He had an abundance of responsibilities to attend to, including the relocation to a new community, his appointment to the chief's office, and the cleanup of the previous individual's mess. She was not about to add middle school drama to his workload. She was capable of managing it. However, the following day, Connor ensured that she was unable to disregard him. It initiated prior to the commencement of the first period. Ava was in the process of retrieving books from her locker when she felt a forceful impact against her back. Her forehead nearly collided with the cold metal as she staggered forward. Laughter. She made a gradual pivot. Connor smirked as he leaned against the lockers. "My bad, Sinclair. Didn't see you there." She did not speak, despite the fact that her fists were clenched at her sides. He desired a response. However, Connor was not content. It had become a rumor by midday. She was uncertain as to who initiated it, however she could make an educated estimate. The murmurs pursued her as she entered the cafeteria. "Did you hear?" She tried to fight Connor. "No way." "Huh? Yeah." Swung on him and everything. "Did?" She cried after. She ceased in her tracks. Her mouth became parched. Connor was seated at his usual table, grinning as he browsed through his phone, as if none of it mattered. The fabric of her sweater was grasped by her fingertips. This was more detrimental than the jostling, the stolen lunches, and the tripping in the hallways. This was to ensure that she was alone, that no one desired to remain with her, converse with her, or be photographed with her, and it was successful. On that day she was alone. Subsequently, she believed that he may have completed the task by Friday. It is possible that he had become disinterested. She was mistaken. Ava walked toward the front doors, relieved to be returning home, as the final bell rang. She was halfway across the parking lot when she heard the voice behind her. "Hey, Sinclair." She disregarded it, continued to walk. "Where are you going? Thought we were friends." Her fingers tightened their grasp on the straps of her backpack. The pavement appeared excessively expansive and exposed. Her wrist was grasped by a hand. Suddenly she pulled away, causing her body to spin. "Don't touch me." Connor grinned, as if this were all a joke. "Relax. I just wanted to say hi." Boys who were situated behind him frequently engaged in laughter. This was their custom. Ava felt her pulse pounding in her ears. "Leave me alone." Connor's voice was subdued as he leaned in. "Or what? You're gonna tell on me?" Ava forced herself to inhale forcefully. She believed that this was not the case. His hand flicked the strap of her knapsack. "You're just mad, 'cause nobody cares." Something broke. Ava shoved him with force before she realized what she was doing. Caught off guard, Connor staggered backwards a few steps. This was the first occasion that he was not smirking, and that should have been the conclusion. However, this was not the case. Connor was unfamiliar with the sensation of embarrassment, and at that instant, he resolved to ensure that she never forgot it. However, Ava was unaware of the extent to which he was prepared to go. In that night, Ava was unable to obtain adequate sleep. The moment her head hit the pillow, her mind relived the scene in the parking lot. The expression on Connor's face when she shoved him, the brief pause in laughter before his friends resumed their conversation. She had never previously touched him, nor had she ever retaliated. Also, she was unaware of the forthcoming events. Nothing transpired on Saturday. The following day is Sunday. By Monday morning, Ava had persuaded herself that it was possible, really possible, that Connor had made the decision to depart. She ought to have been more prudent. It commenced with the looks, then the murmurs. The snickers had evolved into something else by the third period. As she proceeded down the hallway, students pretended to be engaged in an amusing activity by directing their phones toward her. A few were pointed. A few individuals secretly chuckled. Others simply shook their heads, as if they were aware of something she was not. Ava's midsection contorted. She sat at her desk in English class, her eyes fixed on the scuffed surface, attempting to drown out the murmurs that surrounded her. Then a voice emerged from behind her. "Nice photos, Sinclair." Eva's head abruptly jerked upward. Lena Carmichael, a friend of Connor, was smirking as she typed on her phone. Eva's sternum contracted. She searched for her phone in her knapsack with her own hands. Upon unlocking it, she was inundated with notifications. She was unable to exhale. It was a photograph of her, taken in the school parking lot, after she had assaulted Connor. However, it had been modified by an individual. The new version featured Eva's visage contorted in exaggerated anger, and bold red letters were affixed to the top. "Psycho Sinclair can't control herself." Her fingertips trembled. There were numerous comments. "Wow, she looks unhinged." No wonder she has no friends. Connor should have hit her back. I heard she tried to scratch his face. It was no longer merely a hearsay. It was something more dreadful. Something that was tangible and credible. Eva's larynx contracted. She coerced herself to drink. She refrained from weeping. I am not present. Not in their presence. Lena's voice was saccharine sweet as she leaned forward once more. Connor says you have a temper problem. Maybe you should get some help. Eva's pulse was pounding. Her nails were digging into her palm as she gazed directly ahead. In all her life, she had never experienced such humiliation. The image had been viewed by all individuals by lunchtime. It was the sole topic of conversation by the time school ended. Eva was prepared to vanish by the time she arrived at her residence. However, her father was anticipating her arrival at the front door, and he was holding his phone. Eva. His voice was unwavering. An excessive amount of stability. Sit down. Her midsection contorted. She sank into the settee, her backpack remaining on her shoulders. The telephone was directed toward her by her father. The photograph was identical. The same phrases. There was no discernible expression on his countenance. You want to explain this to me? Eva's pulse beat rapidly. I didn't do anything. His pupils darkened as he replied. I am aware. I also know exactly who did. Her pharynx developed a lump. Dad, please. However, he was no longer attentive. He was already in the process of dialing a number, and at that instant, Eva was aware that Connor had finally engaged in an inappropriate relationship with another individual. Eva's father was not a man who shouted. He refrained from making threats or slamming doors. He became silent when he was enraged. Currently, the living room was enveloped in a silence that was uncomfortably oppressive. His expression was inscrutable as he held the phone to his ear. Eva observed him speak, his tone remaining composed yet authoritative. Principal Dawson, we need to talk. Now. Eva's midsection contorted. Her father, who had dedicated years to mediating gang disputes and corruption cases in the city, was now responsible for the spectacle at her school. Additionally, he was not treating it as a drama. On the other end, she could hear Principal Dawson's voice, which was muted. Something regarding the investigation. There is something about children being children. Her father's mandible contracted. No, we're not going to look into it. We're going to fix it. Today, Eva remained motionless. She had never observed him in this manner. Within an hour, they were in his vehicle, en route to Westridge Middle School. The edifice appeared distinct in the evening light, more desolate and tranquil. Principal Dawson was anticipating their arrival by the front office. His arms crossed over his chest. Chief Sinclair, he addressed with an artificial smile. I understand you have some concerns. Her father did not engage in trivial conversations. Connor Tate has been harassing my daughter for more than a month, and he is now spreading false accusations about her online. He retrieved his phone and held it up. This is what I want removed. The principal shifted uncomfortably. Now, Chief, let's not blow this out of proportion. I spoke with Connor's parents, and they assured me. Her father's voice was as hard as steel. I am unconcerned with the assurances his parents provided. I care about what he did. The principal hesitated. We don't want to punish a student for. Her father approached, his voice becoming more subdued. Do you know what my job is, Dawson? I enforce the law. And last I checked, cyber harassment and targeted bullying fall under some serious categories. He hesitated. But you know what's worse? A school that turns a blind eye to it. Eva observed the principal's face becoming increasingly pale. He sputtered. I will speak with the Tates once more. Her father refrained from relocating. You'll do more than talk. You'll make sure that picture is taken down. You'll make sure this doesn't happen again. And you'll hold Connor accountable. Principal Dawson's nervousness was unprecedented to Eva. However, it was evident at this moment. At that moment, the office door was opened. His parents followed Connor Tate into the room. Richard Tate, his father, was a man of considerable stature, with broad shoulders and a costly suit. He was the type of individual who owned golf courses and country clubs. His mother was diminutive, and wore a taut smile that never extended beyond her lips. Nevertheless, Connor's grin had disappeared. Chief Sinclair, Richard stated with ease. I don't see why this had to become a whole spectacle. Her father maintained his composure. Your son made it one. Mrs. Tate's laughter was abrupt. Come on, they're just kids. They push each other. Roughhouse. Eva's fists tightened. Not required. Before speaking, her father exhaled leisurely. If my daughter had done to your son what he did to her, would we be standing here, or would you already have a lawyer lined up? Mr. Tate's mandible twitched. Now let's not make this about. It is about something. It's about power. It's about what you let your son get away with. And it ends here. Connor's gaze veered toward his parents as he shifted uneasily. Principal Dawson was approached by her father. What's the school's official response? The principal hesitated, briefly inspecting the Tates before clearing his throat. Connor will be suspended, effective immediately. The room fell silent. Mrs. Tate exhaled. Suspended? For what a stupid joke. Mr. Tate's complexion became darker. You can't do this.
Do you know who I am?
Her father did not blink. Do you know who I am? The temperature of the chamber was noticeably lower. Mr. Tate's lips were drawn together in a narrow line. This isn't over. Eva's father maintained his composure. You're right. It's not. Connor made a forceful intake. He was no longer smiling. He was the one who appeared to be frightened this time. The following day, and the day after that, Connor Tate failed to attend school. Rumors had begun to circulate by the conclusion of the week. I heard his dad tried to fight the school board over his suspension. I heard his mom called the district, demanding they expunge it from his record. Someone said his family's thinking about pulling him out and sending him to private school. Eva maintained silence throughout the conversation. She simply strolled to class, maintained her head down, and disregarded the glances. However, this time, they were not engulfed in mirth or pity. They were also brimming with reverence. The image of her had vanished from all social media platforms by Monday. Principal Dawson had issued an announcement regarding the school's zero-tolerance policy for bullying and online harassment. It was the type of discourse that would have been meaningless in the past. However, at this moment, individuals were listening. Eva was able to walk down the hallway without feeling the weight of murmurs behind her back by Wednesday. The snickers had diminished. The expressions of disapproval had diminished. A small number of students even nodded in agreement, indicating that they had observed the event. And then there were those who were still uncertain about their position. Eva sat alone during lunch. She had become accustomed to that aspect. However, today, as she nibbled at the edges of her tray, a figure slipped into the seat across from her. She raised her head. Lena Carmichael. Eva's stomach contracted. She was partially anticipating another snide remark, another feignedly sweet dig at her expense. Nevertheless, Lena proceeded to manipulate her food with her utensil. So she began, her gaze not quite meeting Eva's. I suppose you, had the last laugh, huh? Eva declined to respond. Lena cleared her throat. Look, I didn't. I wasn't really trying to be a part of all that. I just, Eva allowed her utensil to strike the tray. You just laughed. Lena shivered. Eva lacked the stamina to engage in this activity. She arose and retrieved her tray. Lena shifted uneasily. He had it coming, you know. Eva retreated. For the first time, Lena gazed upon her. There was no arrogance or sneer. An additional item. An admission of guilt. Eva refrained from uttering any words. She simply resumed her departure. She had the opportunity to make a decision today for the first time in a long time. She was no longer the one who was concealing herself. Connor Tate was. And perhaps just maybe, that indicated that something had finally evolved. However, Eva was not yet finished. The following evening, she sat at the kitchen table as her father prepared a cup of coffee. He inquired, "How is school?" As if it were an ordinary day. Eva shook her head. "Better." He elevated his eyebrow. "Just better," she grinned. "Well, better than it was last week." A ghostly smile spread across his features. "That's good." He sipped his coffee slowly. "You know I'm proud of you." Eva blinks. "For what?" "I didn't do anything." Her father placed his drink on the ground. "You stood up for yourself." She hesitated. "I shouldn't have had to." The intensity of his expression diminished. "No, you shouldn't have." Eva inhaled. "What happens to Connor?" Eva inquired, gazing at the grain of the wooden table that lay beneath her palms. Her father reclined in his chair. "That's up to him." Eva expressed her dissatisfaction. "What do you mean?" Her father conducted an exhaustive examination of her. "Actions have consequences. He's learning that now." Whether he changes or not, that's on him. She contemplated that. Connor had appeared impenetrable for an extended period. He possessed the appropriate family, acquaintances, and surname. He traversed the globe with an air of invincibility. However, he had been mistaken. Ava was no longer apprehensive about him. And perhaps, just maybe, that was the genuine triumph. Because this time, she was not the one gazing over her shoulder as she entered the school. Connor Tate was never seen again by Ava. His family had withdrawn him from school by the conclusion of the week. According to some, he was relocating to a private academy in a different zone. There were rumors that his father had orchestrated an arrangement to enroll him in a residential school, located outside of the state. In any case, he had vanished. Ava was able to breathe for the first time in a long time. However, the absence of Connor did not necessarily result in an immediate state of perfection. The harm had already been inflicted. The months of humiliation and the weight of his cruelty did not dissipate overnight. There were still the stares, the subdued conversations that ceased when she passed by, and the students who were uncertain whether to deny the events or acknowledge them. However, Ava no longer awaited their sanction. Rather, she embarked on an action that she would have never considered before. She raised her hand in class, spoke up when she had something to say, and looked people in the eye as she passed them in the corridors. Over time, the isolation began to weaken. A girl from her math class slipped into the seat next to her during lunch on Friday. She did not say much, offering only a casual, "Hello." A day later, an individual inquired as to whether she would like to participate in their group for a project, rather than allowing the teacher to assign her. On Monday, a boy from her English class, a silent child, who never engaged in any activities, muttered under his breath as he passed her locker. What he did was messed up. Ava swung. What? The lad scarcely glanced at her as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. Just saying, if I had known it was that bad. He interrupted himself by shaking his head. Doesn't matter, but it did. It was significant, because individuals were ultimately able to observe the events that had transpired, not just Ava, what they had permitted to transpire. Silence was a form of criminality in its own right. She did not respond, but rather extended a slight nod. It sufficed. She sat in the living room that evening, flicking through a book while her father read the newspaper. The television was on in the background, emitting a low murmur from a crime series that neither of them were particularly interested in. You know, her father said, folding the newspaper and placing it on the table. I had my own Connor Tate when I was your age. Looking upward, Ava glanced. Yeah, he agreed. Didn't have social media back then, but the game was the same. He reclined, his gaze adrift, as if he were observing an event from the distant past. There's always someone who thinks they can get away with it. Ava hesitated. Did you do anything about it? Her father exhaled gradually. I didn't have a choice. She made a scowl. What do you mean? He maintained a composed demeanor as he addressed her. I had to make a decision. Let him decide who I was, or decide that for myself. Her father smiled slightly as Ava swallowed. I'm sitting here, aren't I? Even she was taken aback by the small chuckle that escaped her. Yeah, guess you are. She received a pat on the shoulder from him. And you are too. Ava contemplated that for an extended period of time. For an extended period, it appeared as though Connor held all the power, as if he had the final say in the outcome, and she had no control. However, this was inaccurate. She had also made a decision to speak, to fight, and to press back. And that was the deciding factor. She arrived at school on Monday morning. The halls had a distinct ambiance, or perhaps she was distinct. A brief nod was given to her by Lena Carmichael from across the hallway. It was not an apology or an excuse, but it was close enough. The English class student held the door open for her without uttering a word. She was seated in the cafeteria when a female from her history class slid into the seat across from her. You mind if I sit here? Ava gazed at her for a brief period. She then merely shrugged. Go for it. She was not seeking an apology from the entire institution. She did not require one, as she had already achieved victory. It is not necessary to eliminate Connor Tate. Rather, it is necessary to ensure that a person similar to him would not acquire victory so readily in the future. Because in the future, individuals would not simply gaze aside. Everyone should be regarded with respect without the need to fight for it. No individual should be required to demonstrate their legitimacy in order to exist without experiencing harassment. However, the reality is that advocating for oneself is not always an effortless endeavor. Occasionally, individuals will turn their gaze aside. Occasionally, they will deny that it is occurring. However, silence facilitates the victory of abusers. And the moment you cease to remain silent, the moment you refuse to allow them to define you, that is when their influence is diminished. Consider subscribing if this narrative resonated with you, due to the significance of these discussions. Additionally, the more we discuss them, the more difficult it becomes for anyone to maintain a denial.